In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green fields and winding dirt roads, there lived a man named Officer Mark. He was not just any policeman. He was known throughout the community for his stern face, sharp tongue, and an overwhelming sense of arrogance. People whispered about him behind closed doors, calling him the untouchable one. Mark believed he was above everyone else, above the rules, above criticism, and certainly above kindness. To him, being a police officer wasn't just a job. It was a crown he wore proudly, even if no one else seemed to respect it. On a crisp autumn morning, when the sun had barely risen over the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Officer Mark decided to patrol the quieter corners of the town. These areas were usually deserted at this hour, save for a few stray animals wandering aimlessly or children playing near their homes. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves, and the streets glistened with dew. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Mark's mind. As he strolled down a narrow alleyway between two old brick buildings, his polished boots clicking against the cobblestones, something caught his eye. A scruffy little dog, its fur matted and dirty, was sniffing around a pile of garbage cans. Its tail wagged lazily as it searched for scraps of food. For most people, the sight might have evoked sympathy, a reminder of how life could be harsh, even for creatures as innocent as animals. But not for Mark. His lips curled into a sneer. "Get out of here," he barked, his voice echoing off the walls. The dog froze, its ears perking up. When it didn't move fast enough to satisfy Mark's impatience, he lifted his foot and kicked it hard. The animal let out a sharp yelp of pain before scrambling away, limping slightly as it disappeared around the corner. Mark watched it go with a smug expression as though he had just taught it a valuable lesson. What Mark didn't realize was that someone had been watching him from across the street. John, a local mechanic with calloused hands and a heart full of compassion, stood frozen in shock. He had come outside early that morning to fetch tools from his truck when he saw the entire scene unfold. His stomach churned as anger bubbled inside him. How could anyone treat a defenseless creature like that? And worse, how could a person sworn to protect others act so cruelly? Without thinking twice, John crossed the street, his jaw clenched tightly. He approached Mark, who was now dusting off his uniform as if nothing had happened. "Why did you do that?" John demanded, his voice shaking with fury. Mark turned slowly, his eyebrows raised in surprise. When he saw who was confronting him, his expression hardened. "Who are you?" he snapped, his tone dripping with disdain. "I'm someone who thinks kicking a dog is disgusting," John shot back, standing his ground despite the knot of fear forming in his chest. Mark scoffed, taking a step closer to John. "This doesn't concern you. Stay out of my way." But John refused to back down. "It concerns me because I live here, because we're supposed to care about each other, and yes, even animals, in this town. You're supposed to protect us, not hurt us." The words hit Mark like a punch to the gut, though he tried not to show it. No one had ever spoken to him like this before. Most people avoided crossing paths with him altogether, let alone challenging him openly. Yet here was John, a simple mechanic with grease-stained fingers, staring him down as if they were equals. Seething with rage, Mark reached for his holster and pulled out his gun. The metallic click of the safety catch being released rang out sharply in the stillness of the morning. Pointing the weapon directly at John, he growled, "You want to test me? Go ahead, see what happens." John's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. His hands instinctively went up, palms facing outward. "Is this really how you solve problems?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "By threatening people with a gun? Does that make you feel powerful?" For a brief moment, doubt flickered in Mark's eyes. He glanced around, suddenly aware of the growing number of onlookers who had gathered nearby. Some had stopped while walking their dogs. Others peeked out from windows or doorways. All of them stared at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright disgust. Yet instead of lowering his weapon, Mark tightened his grip on it. His pride wouldn't allow him to admit he was wrong. Not here, not now. "I don't need your opinion," He spat at John. "You're nobody. Just another peasant trying to tell me how to do my job." John took a deep breath, refusing to let fear dictate his actions. "If your job involves hurting innocent beings, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it at all," he replied firmly. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Neither man moved, locked in a silent battle of wills. Somewhere in the distance a bird chirped cheerfully, oblivious to the drama unfolding below. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark lowered his gun, but only slightly. "You've made your point," he muttered, his voice laced with venom. "But this isn't over." With that, he turned on his heel and marched away, leaving John standing alone in the middle of the street. Though the immediate danger had passed, John knew this was far from the end. Something had shifted that morning, something irreversible. As he watched Mark disappear around the corner, John couldn't shake the feeling that he had ignited a fire that would burn brighter than either of them could have imagined. Little did he know, his act of defiance would set off a chain reaction that would change the entire town forever. The moment Officer Mark disappeared from sight, the quiet street erupted into chaos. Neighbors who had been watching silently from their windows or doorways rushed toward John, bombarding him with questions and exclamations. "Are you okay?" One elderly woman asked, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "That man is a monster," another shouted, shaking his head in disbelief. John, still reeling from the confrontation, could barely find the words to respond. He nodded weakly, trying to steady his breathing. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. Never in his life had he imagined standing face to face with someone pointing a gun at him. Yet here he was, alive but shaken, unsure of what would come next. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. By mid-morning, nearly everyone in the small town knew about the arrogant policeman who had kicked a helpless dog and then drawn his weapon on an innocent citizen. Social media platforms lit up with posts, some condemning Mark's actions, others praising John for his bravery. Videos taken by bystanders began circulating online, capturing every detail of the tense standoff. In one clip, you could hear John's calm yet firm voice challenging Mark, while in another, you saw the look of shock on people's faces as they witnessed the absurdity unfold. As the day wore on, public outrage grew louder. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice for the dog," and "No more bullying cops." Their chants echoed through the streets, drawing even more attention to the situation. Local news crews arrived, setting up cameras and microphones to capture interviews with residents. The once peaceful town now buzzed with anger and frustration, all directed at Officer Mark. Meanwhile, inside the police station, Mark sat alone in his office, staring blankly at the wall. For the first time in years, panic gripped him. He replayed the events of the morning over and over in his mind, each memory twisting into something uglier than before. He couldn't stop thinking about the way John had looked at him, not with fear but with defiance. It unnerved him. Worse still were the images of the crowd that had gathered, their eyes filled with judgment and contempt. Mark had always prided himself on being untouchable. His badge was supposed to shield him from criticism, and his authority was meant to command respect. But today, everything had changed. People weren't afraid of him anymore. They hated him, and worst of all, they weren't afraid to say it. His colleagues avoided him, whispering amongst themselves whenever he passed by. Even the chief of police, a grizzled man named Captain Harris, called him into his office for a private meeting. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Captain Harris barked, slamming a stack of printed social media posts onto his desk. Each page contained screenshots of videos and comments criticizing Mark's behavior. "This isn't just bad press. It's a disaster. You've made us all look like fools." Mark opened his mouth to defend himself but quickly closed it again. What could he say? That he had acted out of frustration? That the dog had annoyed him? None of those excuses would hold water now. Instead, he muttered, "I didn't mean for things to get this far." "Well, congratulations." Captain Harris snapped. "You've succeeded in making yourself the most hated man in town. Now we have to deal with the fallout." That night, sleep eluded Mark. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of the morning. The frightened dog limping away, John's unwavering gaze, the horrified expressions of the onlookers. Guilt gnawed at him, though he tried desperately to suppress it. Pride refused to let him admit he was wrong. Instead, he convinced himself that the world was simply against him, that people didn't understand the pressures of being a police officer. But deep down, doubt crept in. Was he really the hero he believed himself to be? Or was he just a bully hiding behind a badge? These thoughts haunted him, keeping him awake until dawn. On the other side of town, John wrestled with his own emotions. While many hailed him as a hero, he couldn't shake the lingering fear of retaliation. Would Mark come after him? Would there be consequences for speaking out against someone in power? Despite these worries, John felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. This was bigger than him. It was about standing up for what was right, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been intimidated by Mark's tyranny. Determined to see justice served, John reached out to local animal rights groups and legal advisors. Together, they began gathering evidence to file a formal complaint against Mark. Witnesses came forward, recounting similar incidents where Mark had abused his authority. Others shared stories of how he had treated them rudely or unfairly during traffic stops or disputes. One particularly damning piece of evidence came from a young boy named Tommy, who lived near the alley where the incident occurred. Using his phone, Tommy had recorded the entire scene without Mark noticing. The video clearly showed Mark kicking the dog and then pulling his gun on John. When played back, the footage left no room for denial. It was proof of Mark's reckless behavior. With the support of the community, John submitted the complaint to the police department's Internal Affairs Division. He included witness statements, medical records obtained from a veterinarian who examined the injured dog, and copies of the viral videos. It was a bold move, one that required courage he didn't know he possessed. As days turned into weeks, the investigation into Mark's conduct dragged on. Public pressure mounted, forcing authorities to take swift action. Rumors swirled about possible outcomes. Would Mark be fired, arrested, suspended? Everyone waited anxiously for answers. For Mark, the wait was unbearable. He avoided leaving his house, fearing the stares and jeers of townspeople. Once admired, or at least tolerated for his position, he now felt like a pariah. Friends stopped calling and neighbors crossed the street to avoid him. Even his wife, Sarah, grew distant, unable to reconcile the man she married with the person described in the headlines. "You brought this on yourself," she said one evening, her voice heavy with disappointment. "How could you treat people and animals like that? I don't even recognize you anymore." Her words stung more than anything else. Mark wanted to argue, to explain that he was misunderstood, but he couldn't deny the truth. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of why he became a police officer in the first place. In contrast, John found himself embraced by the community. Strangers approached him in grocery stores and cafes to thank him for standing up to injustice. Animal shelters offered free adoptions in his name, and schools invited him to speak about the importance of kindness and accountability. Though humbled by the attention, John remained grounded. "I didn't do anything special," he told reporters during an interview. "I just couldn't stay silent while someone used their power to hurt others. We all have a responsibility to speak up when we see wrongdoing." His words resonated deeply, inspiring others to take action in their own lives. Slowly but surely, the town began to heal. The scruffy dog that had sparked the chain of events was nursed back to health and adopted by a loving family. A memorial fund was established in its honor to support stray animals in need. Though the road ahead would be long, one thing was clear: change had begun. And it had started with a single act of courage, a mechanic named John refusing to back down, even when faced with the barrel of a gun. The days following the incident felt like an eternity for both Mark and John, though their experiences couldn't have been more different. For Mark, every waking moment was a torment of paranoia and self-loathing. He spent most of his time holed up in his dimly lit living room, curtains drawn tight to block out the world outside. The weight of public scrutiny pressed down on him relentlessly. Everywhere he went, even in his own home, he could feel the eyes of judgment boring into him. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from social media, each one carrying another wave of criticism. Comments poured in under news articles about him, some calling for his immediate dismissal, others suggesting harsher punishments. "He deserves jail time," one person wrote. "A man like that shouldn't be allowed near a badge." Another commenter added, "If he can point a gun at someone over a dog, what else is he capable of?" Each word cut deeper than the last, chipping away at whatever remained of his fragile ego. Mark tried to distract himself by watching television, but even that offered no solace. Every channel seemed to be discussing his case. Talk show hosts debated whether police reform was necessary, using his actions as a prime example of systemic failure. Late-night comedians cracked jokes at his expense, their laughter amplified by studio audiences who roared in agreement. It was as if the entire world had turned against him, and there was nowhere left to hide. At night, sleep evaded him. When exhaustion finally forced him to close his eyes, nightmares plagued him. In one recurring dream, he stood in the middle of the street where the incident had occurred, surrounded by a crowd of faceless figures pointing accusing fingers at him. Among them was the scruffy dog, its eyes glowing eerily as it growled low and menacing. Then suddenly John appeared, standing tall and unafraid, holding a mirror that reflected Mark's true self back at him, a broken, hollow shell of a man, consumed by arrogance and cruelty. On the other hand, John found himself thrust into the spotlight in ways he never anticipated. People treated him like a local celebrity, stopping him on the street to shake his hand or pat him on the back. Children asked for autographs, and elderly women baked pies to thank him for his bravery. While John appreciated the support, he often felt uncomfortable being labeled a hero. "I'm just a regular guy," he told anyone who praised him. "I did what anyone should do when they see something wrong." Despite his humility, the attention kept coming. Local newspapers ran feature stories about him, highlighting his background as a mechanic and his love for animals. One article included a photo of him fixing a car engine, oil stains smeared across his arms with the caption, "The everyday hero who stood up to tyranny." Animal rights organizations reached out to collaborate with him, offering resources and platforms to amplify his message. John embraced these opportunities not for personal gain, but because he saw them as a chance to make a difference. He began organizing community events aimed at raising awareness about animal abuse and promoting kindness. At one such gathering, dozens of families brought their pets to receive free checkups from volunteer veterinarians. Others donated supplies to shelters struggling to care of abandoned animals. But amidst the praise and newfound purpose, John couldn't ignore the lingering fear of retaliation. What if Mark decided to settle the score? Would he come after him late at night or try to sabotage his reputation? These thoughts haunted him, especially when he returned home after long days of advocacy work. He installed extra locks on his doors and kept a baseball bat near his bed, just in case. Still, John refused to let fear dictate his life. If anything, it fueled his determination to fight for justice. He worked tirelessly alongside legal advisors to ensure the complaint against Mark was thorough and irrefutable. They gathered additional evidence, including testimonies from former colleagues who described Mark's history of abusive behavior. One officer recounted how Mark had once threatened to write him up simply for questioning his methods during a routine patrol. A shopkeeper shared how Mark had fined her unfairly after she accidentally parked too close to a fire hydrant. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of a man who abused his power without remorse. By the time the investigation reached its final stages, the file detailing Mark's misconduct was thick enough to fill an entire binder. As the trial approached, tension in the town reached a fever pitch. Social media buzzed with speculation about the outcome. Some believed justice would prevail, while others feared the system might protect Mark due to his position. Protesters continued to gather outside the courthouse, holding signs and chanting slogans. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Rows of benches filled quickly with spectators eager to witness the proceedings. Journalists jostled for seats near the front, microphones and cameras ready to capture every detail. When Mark entered the room flanked by lawyers, whispers rippled through the crowd. Gone was the confident swagger he once carried. Now he shuffled nervously, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When it was his turn to testify, Mark's voice trembled as he spoke. He attempted to justify his actions, claiming he had acted out of frustration and that the situation had escalated beyond his control. But his excuses fell flat under cross-examination. Lawyers presented video footage showing how calmly John had responded, despite the threat of violence. Veterinarians testified about the injuries sustained by the dog, emphasizing the unnecessary cruelty involved. John, meanwhile, took the stand with quiet confidence. He recounted the events of that fateful morning, describing how Mark's arrogance had spiraled into recklessness. His words resonated deeply with the jury and those listening. "This isn't just about me or that poor dog," he said, his voice steady yet impassioned. "It's about holding people accountable, especially those in positions of authority. We trust officers to protect us, not harm us. If we don't demand accountability, then who will?" By the end of the trial, it was clear which side held the moral high ground. The jury deliberated for hours before returning with a verdict: guilty of misconduct and abuse of power. Gasps erupted in the courtroom as the judge announced Mark's punishment: suspension without pay, mandatory anger management counseling, and permanent revocation of his badge. For Mark, the ruling was devastating. As he left the courthouse surrounded by reporters, flashes of cameras blinded him, and jeers followed him wherever he went. His career was over, and so was his reputation. For John, however, the victory was bittersweet. While he was glad to see justice served, he knew this was only the beginning. Real change required more than punishing one bad actor. It demanded systemic reforms and a commitment to treating everyone, and every creature, with respect and compassion. As the sun set over the small town that evening, casting long shadows, across the streets John stood outside his garage watching children play with their dogs nearby. The air smelled fresh again, untainted by fear or hatred. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to smile. Though challenges lay ahead, John felt hopeful. After all, sometimes it takes just one brave act to spark a movement. And in this town, that movement had already begun. The verdict against Officer Mark sent shockwaves through the small town, leaving no one untouched. For some, it was a moment of triumph, a rare instance where justice seemed to align with morality. For others, it served as a sobering reminder of the fragility of trust in those tasked with protecting society. But for Mark himself, the ruling marked the beginning of a long and painful descent into isolation. Mark's descent into isolation. After losing his badge and facing public humiliation, Mark became a ghost of his former self. The once arrogant policeman who strutted through the streets with an air of invincibility now avoided stepping outside altogether. His house, once a symbol of authority and order, transformed into a fortress of shame. He installed blackout curtains to shield himself from prying eyes and unplugged his phone to escape the endless barrage of hateful messages. Neighbors reported seeing him pacing back and forth late at night, muttering under his breath. Occasionally, they heard crashes or thuds followed by eerie silence. It was as if he were wrestling with invisible demons born from guilt, pride, and regret. His wife, Sarah, had already left him, unable to reconcile the man she married with the person exposed during the trial. Their home, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with emptiness. One evening, while sitting alone in the dark, Mark picked up an old photo album. Flipping through its pages, he came across pictures of his early days as a police officer. In one photo, he stood proudly beside his mentor, a grizzled veteran named Captain Lewis, who had taught him the importance of integrity and service. "You wear that badge not because you're better than everyone else," Captain Lewis used to say, "but because you've chosen to be held to a higher standard." Tears welled up in Mark's eyes as he realized how far he had strayed from those ideals. Somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that the badge made him superior, that rules didn't apply to him. Now stripped of everything he valued, his career, his reputation, his family, he understood the true cost of his arrogance. But understanding wasn't enough to undo the damage. The townspeople still loathed him, and even strangers passing through knew his name as synonymous with cruelty and abuse of power. Every knock on the door sent his heart racing. Every car driving past made him flinch. He lived in constant fear of retaliation, wondering if someone might decide to take matters into their own hands. Desperate for redemption or at least peace, Mark began attending anger management classes as mandated by the court. At first, he approached them reluctantly, viewing them as yet another punishment. But over time, he started listening to the stories shared by others in the group. Many spoke of struggles similar to his, feelings of inadequacy masked by aggression, cycles of behavior rooted in childhood trauma. Slowly, painfully, Mark began to confront the roots of his own anger. Still, progress was slow. Even after months of therapy, he couldn't bring himself to apologize publicly or seek forgiveness from those he had wronged. Pride remained a stubborn barrier, preventing him from fully embracing change. Instead, he retreated further into solitude, haunted by the knowledge that he might never earn back the respect he had lost. John's growing influence. While Mark faded into obscurity, John emerged as a beacon of hope and resilience. His courage during the trial inspired countless people to stand up against injustice, both big and small. Local schools invited him to speak about accountability and kindness, and animal shelters renamed fundraising events in his honor. A mural, depicting him standing protectively in front of the scruffy dog, appeared on the side of a downtown building, painted by a group of high school students eager to celebrate his heroism. Despite the adoration, John remained humble. "I'm not special," he often said. "I just did what anyone should do when they see something wrong." Yet deep down he knew his actions had sparked something extraordinary, a movement toward greater empathy and accountability. John channeled this momentum into tangible change. With support from local leaders, he helped establish a citizen oversight committee to monitor police conduct in the town. Comprised of volunteers from diverse backgrounds, the committee reviewed complaints, conducted independent investigations, and provided recommendations to improve transparency and fairness within law enforcement. He also partnered with animal rights organizations to launch programs aimed at reducing stray populations and educating residents about responsible pet ownership. One initiative involved setting up free microchipping clinics, ensuring that lost pets could be reunited with their owners quickly. Another focused on rehabilitating abused animals and finding them loving homes. Through these efforts, John demonstrated that standing up to injustice wasn't just about confronting wrongdoing. It was about creating systems that prevented such abuses from happening again. His work earned national recognition, with magazines and television networks profiling him as a champion of grassroots activism. Yet, despite the accolades, John faced challenges of his own. Some critics accused him of seeking fame or using the incident for personal gain. Others dismissed his initiatives as naive or impractical, arguing that systemic issues required more than goodwill to solve. These criticisms stung, but John refused to let them deter him. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he told reporters during an interview, "and it doesn't come from waiting for someone else to do it. It starts with taking one step, no matter how small, and trusting that others will follow." His perseverance paid off. Over time, skepticism gave way to support as communities witnessed the positive impact of his efforts. Crime rates dropped, thanks in part to improved relations between citizens and law enforcement. Stray animal populations decreased significantly, and adoption rates soared. Even Mark's former colleagues acknowledged the benefits of increased accountability, albeit begrudgingly. A new chapter for the town. As months turned into years, the town began to heal. The scars left by Mark's actions would always remain, but they served as reminders of the importance of vigilance and compassion. Conversations shifted from blame and resentment to collaboration and growth. Residents took pride in their collective resilience, celebrating milestones like the opening of a new community center dedicated to fostering unity and understanding. For John, life settled into a rhythm of purpose and fulfillment. Though he continued working as a mechanic, his advocacy work consumed much of his time. He mentored young activists, encouraging them to believe in their ability to affect change. On weekends, he visited schools to teach children about empathy and responsibility, often bringing along rescued dogs to demonstrate the transformative power of kindness. Meanwhile, Mark remained largely absent from public life. Rumors circulated about his whereabouts. Some claimed he had moved away, while others believed he still lived in the same house, hidden behind closed doors. Whatever the truth, most people preferred to leave the past where it belonged, in the rearview mirror. One crisp autumn morning, exactly 5 years after the incident, John received a letter in the mail. The envelope bore no return address, and the handwriting was shaky and unfamiliar. Curious, he opened it and found a single sheet of paper inside. "Dear John," it read, "I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your actions changed me, even if it took a long time to admit it. You reminded me of what it means to be human. Thank you for standing up when I wouldn't. Sincerely, Mark." John stared at the note for a long time, unsure of how to feel. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as too little, too late. Another part recognized the courage it must have taken for Mark to write it. Ultimately, he decided to let go of any lingering bitterness. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about excusing wrongdoing. It was about freeing oneself from the weight of hatred. That afternoon, John walked to the park where the mural of him and the dog stood. Children played nearby, laughing and chasing each other. Dogs barked happily, tails wagging in the cool breeze. Standing there, surrounded by joy and innocence, John felt a profound sense of gratitude. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but for now, the town and its people were moving forward together. And in that moment, John knew that was all that mattered. 5 years had passed since the incident that shook the small town to its core. The seasons had changed, leaves falling and regrowing countless times. But the memories of that fateful autumn morning remained etched in the minds of those who lived through it. For John, the mechanic turned advocate, life had settled into a rhythm of purpose and fulfillment. For Mark, the disgraced former officer, life was a shadowy existence marked by regret and isolation. Yet even as both men walked vastly different paths, their stories continued to intertwine in ways neither could have predicted. A town transformed. The town itself bore little resemblance to what it had been half a decade earlier. Once known for its quiet charm and sleepy streets, it had transformed into a hub of activism and community-driven change. The Citizen Oversight Committee John helped establish became a model for neighboring towns, earning praise from state officials and national organizations alike. Regular meetings were held to discuss issues ranging from police conduct to environmental sustainability, fostering a culture of transparency and collaboration. Animal welfare also saw remarkable progress. Thanks to John's tireless efforts, the stray dog population dwindled significantly, replaced by thriving adoption centers and foster networks. The scruffy mutt that had sparked the chain of events, the same one whose cries had pierced the early morning air, was now living happily with a loving family. They named him Hero, not just because of his role in exposing injustice, but because he represented resilience and hope. Every year, on the anniversary of the incident, the town hosted a celebration called Day of Courage. Streets filled with laughter, music, and food stalls, while volunteers handed out pamphlets about kindness and accountability. Children participated in essay contests, writing about how ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. At the center of it all stood John, ever humble, accepting gratitude with a smile and encouraging others to keep pushing for positive change. But despite these outward signs of healing, scars lingered beneath the surface. Some residents still harbored resentment toward Mark, viewing him as a symbol of unchecked authority. Others questioned whether systemic reforms would truly prevent future abuses or merely paper over deeper cracks. Even John, for all his optimism, couldn't ignore the lingering doubts that occasionally crept into his mind. Was this enough? Could they ever ensure no one else would suffer as he had? Mark's fragile redemption. For Mark, redemption felt like an impossible dream. After losing everything, his badge, his wife, his dignity, he retreated further, into solitude. His days blurred together, spent either pacing aimlessly around his house or staring blankly at old photographs. Nights were worse. Sleep eluded him, haunted by visions of angry crowds and accusing eyes. The weight of guilt pressed down on him constantly, heavier than any badge he'd ever worn. Yet amidst the darkness, flickers of light began to emerge. Anger management classes forced him to confront painful truths about himself, truths he had buried beneath layers of arrogance and pride. Through shared stories and honest conversations, he realized he wasn't alone in his struggles. Many in the group spoke of similar battles, feelings of inadequacy masked by aggression, cycles of behavior rooted in childhood trauma. Slowly, painfully, Mark started to piece together the fractured puzzle of his own psyche. One breakthrough came during a session where participants were asked to write letters to someone they had wronged. For weeks, Mark resisted the exercise, claiming it wouldn't do any good. But eventually, curiosity got the better of him. Sitting at his kitchen table late one night, pen trembling in his hand, he began drafting a letter to John. Each word was agonizing to write, dredging up emotions he had long suppressed. By the time he finished, tears stained the page, smudging the ink. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter read, "nor do I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your actions changed me, even if it took a long time to admit it. You reminded me of what it means to be human. Thank you for standing up when I wouldn't." Sealing the envelope, Mark hesitated. Would sending it reopen old wounds, or would it offer some measure of closure for both of them? In the end, he dropped it in the mailbox, unsure of what response, if any, he might receive. John's reaction. When John opened the letter days later, his heart raced. He hadn't heard from Mark in years, nor did he expect to. Reading, the words scrawled across the page stirred conflicting emotions within him. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as too little, too late, a hollow attempt to ease Mark's conscience without addressing the harm he had caused. Another part recognized the courage it must have taken to write such a message. That evening, John sat on his porch, staring at the horizon as the sun dipped below the hills. He thought about the past 5 years, the victories, the setbacks, the countless moments of doubt and triumph. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about excusing wrongdoing. It was about freeing oneself from the burden of hatred. Holding on to anger only gave Mark power over him, even after all this time. With a deep breath, John decided to let go. Not for Mark's sake, but for his own. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, vowing never to dwell on it again. Instead, he focused on the present, the laughter of children playing nearby, the wagging tails of happy dogs, the sense of purpose that filled his days. Life was too precious to waste on bitterness. An unexpected encounter. Weeks later, fate intervened in an unexpected way. While walking through the park one afternoon, John noticed a figure sitting alone on a bench. At first glance, he didn't recognize him. The man wore shabby clothes and kept his head bowed, shoulders slumped under the weight of unseen burdens. But as John drew closer, realization dawned. It was Mark. Their eyes met briefly before Mark looked away, clearly embarrassed. John paused, unsure of what to say. Finally, breaking the silence, he offered a simple greeting. "Hey." Mark flinched as though bracing for hostility. When none came, he mumbled, I just wanted to see the mural." John followed, his gaze to the vibrant painting on the side of the building. It depicted him standing protectively in front of the scruffy dog, surrounded by smiling faces. Below it, bold letters proclaimed, "Courage changes everything." "It's beautiful," Mark admitted quietly. "You've done so much good here." John nodded, choosing his words carefully. "It wasn't easy, and it's not over yet." There's always more work to do. They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the park filling the space between them. Eventually, Mark spoke again. I know I can't undo what I did, but I wanted you to know I'm trying. To be better? I mean, John studied him for a moment, seeing not the arrogant policeman from years ago, but a broken man desperate for redemption. That's all anyone can ask for, he replied gently. Just keep going. As they parted ways, John felt a strange sense of peace. He didn't forgive Mark entirely, not then, perhaps not ever, but he understood that true justice wasn't about punishment. It was about growth, both for the wrongdoer and the wronged. And in that moment, he believed the town and its people were finally moving forward together. A legacy of change. In the years that followed, the town continued to thrive. New generations grew up learning about empathy, accountability, and the power of standing up for what's right. Schools incorporated lessons about the incident into their curricula, ensuring that future leaders would carry forward the values championed by John and others like him. Mark, meanwhile, faded back into obscurity. Though he occasionally attended community events, he preferred to remain in the background, volunteering quietly at shelters and mentoring troubled youth. His transformation wasn't complete, nor was it perfect, but it was real. And John? He kept doing what he did best, fixing cars, rescuing animals, and inspiring others to believe in the possibility of change. On sunny mornings, he could often be found sitting on his porch watching the world pass by with a contented smile. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. And sometimes, that was enough. For a town once torn apart by cruelty and arrogance, healing had become its greatest triumph. And in the hearts of its people, the memory of that autumn morning served not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that courage, kindness, and perseverance could reshape even the darkest chapters into something worth celebrating. Years had passed since the incident that changed everything in the small town. The seasons cycled through their usual rhythms. Spring's blossoms gave way to summer's heat, which softened into autumn's crisp air before yielding to winter's frost. Yet no matter how much time elapsed, the ripple effects of that fateful morning continued to shape the lives of those involved. For John and Mark, as well as the community they shared, the journey toward healing was ongoing. It wasn't always smooth, but it was undeniable. A new dawn for the town. The town itself had evolved into something remarkable, a testament to resilience and collective effort. Where once there were whispers of fear and distrust, now there was open dialogue and collaboration. The Citizen Oversight Committee, spearheaded by John, became a cornerstone of civic engagement. Regular meetings drew crowds eager to voice concerns, celebrate successes, and brainstorm solutions. Transparency replaced secrecy, and accountability became more than just a buzzword. It became a way of life. One of the most visible changes was the transformation of the local police force. Officers underwent rigorous training programs focused on de-escalation techniques, mental health awareness, and cultural sensitivity. Community policing initiatives brought residents and law enforcement together, fostering trust through shared activities like neighborhood cleanups and youth mentorship programs. Slowly but surely, the badge reclaimed its original meaning, a symbol of service rather than intimidation. Animal welfare also flourished under John's leadership. What started as a grassroots movement blossomed into a thriving network of shelters, foster homes, and educational campaigns. Hero, the scruffy mutt who had inadvertently sparked the chain of events, became the face of this initiative. His story inspired countless others to adopt, volunteer, and advocate for vulnerable animals. Every year, during the Day of Courage festival, Hero made an appearance, wagging his tail and basking in the adoration of the crowd. Yet despite these outward signs of progress, challenges remained. Some residents still harbored skepticism about whether systemic reforms would hold over time. Others wondered if the scars left by Mark's actions could ever fully heal. Even John, for all his optimism, occasionally found himself questioning whether enough had been done to prevent future injustices. But these doubts only fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. Mark's quiet redemption. For Mark, redemption was a slow and painful process. Losing his badge had stripped him of not just his career but his identity. For years, he lived in self-imposed exile, consumed by guilt and shame. The letter he wrote to John marked a turning point, a fragile step toward acknowledging his mistakes and seeking forgiveness. Though he never expected absolution, the act of writing it helped him confront the depth of his wrongdoing. Over time, Mark began volunteering at animal shelters, a decision driven partly by penance and partly by a newfound appreciation for creatures he had once dismissed. Cleaning kennels, feeding strays, and comforting frightened animals gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He often worked quietly, avoiding attention, but shelter staff noticed the care and patience he brought to his tasks. One worker remarked, "He may not say much, but you can see the change in him. He treats every animal like it's the most important thing in the world." Mark also took on a role mentoring troubled teenagers through a local outreach program. Many of the kids reminded him of his younger self, angry, lost, and searching for validation in all the wrong places. Sharing his story with them, not as a cautionary tale but as proof that people can change, helped him find a measure of peace. Though he rarely attended public events, Mark made exceptions for the annual Day of Courage celebration. Standing at the edges of the crowd, he watched silently as families laughed, children played, and dogs bounded happily across the park. Each year he lingered near the mural depicting John and Hero, marveling at how far the town and he himself had come. John's enduring legacy. John, meanwhile, remained the heart and soul of the town's transformation. Though he never sought fame or recognition, his influence was undeniable. People looked to him not just as a hero, but as a guiding light. His humility and unwavering commitment to kindness inspired countless others to follow in his footsteps. In addition to his advocacy work, John continued running his mechanic shop, where customers often lingered longer than necessary just to hear his stories or seek advice. Children from nearby schools visited regularly, peppering him with questions about courage, justice, and making a difference. To each group, John offered the same simple message: you don't have to be extraordinary to make a change. Sometimes, doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is enough. Behind the scenes, John worked tirelessly to ensure the town's momentum didn't falter. He collaborated with educators to develop curricula centered on empathy and responsibility. He partnered with businesses to fund scholarships for students pursuing careers in social work and law enforcement reform. And he advocated tirelessly for policies that prioritized compassion over punishment. Despite his many accomplishments, John remained grounded. On quiet evenings, he could often be found sitting on his porch sipping tea and watching the sunset. Occasionally, Hero would trot up beside him, resting his head on John's knee as if to remind him of how far they'd come together. These moments of stillness allowed John to reflect, not on what he had achieved but on what lay ahead. An unlikely bond. Though John and Mark rarely crossed paths, their lives remained intertwined in subtle ways. Both men carried the weight of the past, though they bore it differently. For John, it was a reminder of why he fought so hard for justice and kindness. For Mark, it was a constant call to do better, to prove that people could change, even after causing immense harm. Their final encounter occurred on a chilly autumn morning, 5 years to the day after the incident. John was walking through the park when he spotted Mark standing in front of the mural. This time, Mark didn't look away. Instead, he turned to face John, his expression a mix of apprehension and resolve. "I came to thank you," Mark said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Not just for what you did back then, but for everything you've done since. You didn't just stand up to me. You showed everyone here what real strength looks like." John hesitated, studying the man before him. Gone was the arrogance and cruelty. In its place stood someone humbled and sincere. "I didn't do it alone," John replied eventually. This town changed because we all chose to believe in something better. They shook hands briefly, the gesture unspoken yet profound. As they parted ways, neither looked back. There was no need. They both understood that the past couldn't be erased, but it could be redeemed. A future built on courage. As the years rolled on, the town continued to grow and thrive. New generations inherited the values championed by those who came before them: empathy, accountability, and the belief that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. Schools taught lessons about the incident, ensuring that future leaders would carry forward the legacy of courage and compassion. For John, the journey was far from over. Though his hair grayed and his hands grew weathered, his spirit remained as vibrant as ever. He knew there would always be challenges to face, injustices to confront, and hearts to heal. But he also knew that as long as people stood together, anything was possible. And for Mark, redemption wasn't a destination. It was a lifelong pursuit. He never forgot the pain he had caused, nor did he expect others to forget. But he found solace in knowing that his actions, however flawed, had sparked a movement toward greater understanding and accountability. In helping others, he began to forgive himself. On sunny mornings, as sunlight filtered through the trees and laughter filled the air, it was easy to believe that the town had truly healed. The scars of the past remained, but they served as reminders not of pain, but of resilience. Courage, kindness, and perseverance had reshaped even the darkest chapters into something worth celebrating. In the end, the story of the arrogant policeman and the mechanic who stood up to him wasn't just about two men. It was about a community coming together to demand better, for themselves, for each other, and for the generations to come. And in that unity, they found hope, purpose, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.